Welcome to the Low-Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD podcast. Tro, we have someone from the dark side, an endocrinologist. Have we ever let an endocrinologist on before?
I think this is going to be the first one. Very special. Somebody who I've followed on social media for a long time, watched her interview on Diet Doctor. I'm just excited to have Dr. Roshani Sanghani come on, a board certified endocrinologist who is also an SMHP accredited practitioner. So double, triple kudos, right? She unlearned everything and then relearned it. She did her medical school training in India, GS Medical. She went off to internal medicine residency in Chicago and did her endocrinology fellowship in UIC. And she's been practicing in India for 10 years, where she has a passion for new technologies, continuous care, and she's been focusing on de-prescription. So right up our alley. I'm so excited to have you here. I've been following you on social media for a bit. I think both Twitter for a bit, and I think also LinkedIn, but certainly some of your YouTube as well. So awesome. Excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for that. I'm honored to be here, both Tro and Brian. I've been listening to your podcast, and I think we're common fans of Dr. Jason Fung's work, and it's been transformational. So excited to bring the Indian perspective to this.
Yeah. So help us understand. You lived in India for a bit, I think. And before you, and then you came, I think you were born in the States, moved to India, and you lived for India for a bit before you came back for training. You saw a lot of this diabetes epidemic blossom in India, I'd imagine. How did what you saw happen inspire you? Like, how did you get started in medicine? What were the things that catalyzed you to say, I want to become a doctor and I want to go into this field of endocrinology, which is heavily focused on hormones and particularly diabetes?
Yeah, thank you. That's actually, depends how much time you have. I can give you the long or the short, but
We got like an hour and 15 minutes.
So let me take a little bit of time to sort of speak my heart out here. Is I care a lot. I've always sort of, believed in mind-body medicine. I've heard and seen in family and close friends, different people who had diagnosis of cancer when I was not in medical school, and saw one person take the diagnosis and fight it and say, I don't have time for cancer. I have so much to live for. And they sort of battled it and pushed it away for 50 years. And somebody who almost got shattered, pretty much got shattered, and we lost them in their 40s to cancer. And it just started to bug me, is what is the role of the mind in disease? And so I actually did a year of psychiatry before coming back to medicine. I wanted to be hands-on, but I was always interested in human behavior. And so I said, I want to do it from the internal medicine standpoint. Early in residency, I got rotations, how you move around, and diabetes and hormones. I thought hormones were fascinating. And if endocrinologists have a bad reputation, let me try and fix some of that. Is, when it comes to lifestyle disease, is I thought hormones were amazing because they help each organ talk to each other. Is what goes on in the kidney gets to the lungs, goes to the heart, all this communication between different complex systems. So everything that was good about internal medicine gets even better when you get to endocrinology. And it was very responsive to behavior change. So that's what brought out the habit angle to it, and how we work with people on lifestyle change. I realized that we can actually work on habits and influence health. And endocrinology just seemed like the perfect setup for that.
And then what happened in your training?
in training, I started, well, so there's, like you said, there's the light side and the dark side. So both happened. We were trained to prescribe and use medication, and it's one way, and there's somehow this magic cliff where the DPP study, right, New England Journal of Medicine 2002 says pre-diabetes metformin is, inferior to lifestyle change. So you had more prevention of diabetes with lifestyle than you did metformin. And then magically, when the HbA1c crosses 6.5, the ADA steps in, and you have these standards of care where you have these colorful algorithms that come out every year. And then there's like, does the patient afford stuff? Does the patient have kidney disease? Does the patient have heart disease? Does the patient want to avoid weight gain? Does the patient want to avoid hypoglycemia? And I just started getting bothered looking at those algorithms. I was like, none of my patients want weight gain. None of my patients want hypoglycemia. None of my patients want to spend lots of money on medication. And why would I wait for their heart and kidneys to get damaged to make a medication choice? I'm supposed to prevent this stuff. So I just could not get my head around the algorithms. And
yeah, the algorithms make you crazy, right? Like you look at it and they'll go, diet and exercise. When that doesn't work, here's what you do. And they don't say, hey, look, here's how we're going to reinforce this. Here's what we're going to do to educate people. It's just like, they just jumped right to the meds.
Yeah, and I saw this clash and contradiction. They say type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle disease. And they also say diabetes is a chronic and progressive disease. I was like, how's that possible? What if you change the lifestyle? It doesn't add up. How is it chronic and progressive if you change the lifestyle? But you go to conferences, you put your hand up, you stand up, you protest, and then somebody on the stage shushes you down because you're making somebody uncomfortable, because who's paying for this conference? You can't upset the sponsors. So this started to happen, and I'm very guilty of sitting across the table and telling people whose HbA1c was above 9, I was like, look, you failed on 4 tablets. I have to give you insulin. Insulin's the right thing for you. And at the same time, there was this other side of me that was not satisfied. I didn't have answers. But early in my career, I was lucky to meet diabetes educators. And so when I was moving from the US to India, when I had finished my training, I'd been in private practice, I had actually had this curiosity. So because of my interest in human behavior, I used to sneak out and find time during my fellowship days to go sit in on my diabetes educator classes. I was like, when we say refer to educator, what happens there? And because we would prescribe it, and I knew everything about the pharmacology part of my prescription, but my own prescription, I didn't understand what happens when I say refer to educator. Refer to carb counting class, refer to what's for dinner class. And these were UIC calendars. Like there was this weekly calendar of classes. So I snuck out and I sat in on some of those, and I watched my educator teach patient stuff. And I was like, oh, this is so important. Why do we not know this? Why do we not have any grip on this? And why are we excluded from these conversations? I understand that when you talk about billable hours, doctors are the most expensive and they're not supposed to be the ones doing education. But we can't be ignorant about what our educators know and how they talk to the patient. So that was big. And so before I left America, I decided to certify as a diabetes educator because I was moving countries. I was going to meet a new population, although I have Indian heritage. My med school was India. I was coming back to India as an adult now, as a practicing doctor. And I felt like this is the time to shake things up and change paradigms. So I certified as a diabetes educator. And the biggest thing that struck me there was they said, you have to switch your paradigm from a patient compliance model to a patient empowerment model. And I was like, what? Patients are supposed to do what the doctor says. That's how it goes. And here, this educator book says, empower the patient. And that resonated much deeper for me than just pushing it one way and telling patients what to do. Because as a personality, that's what I used to do. I used to be slow in my clinics. I would sit and listen to my patients, and I would talk to them and listen to them and understand their problems. And it was my clinic was always slow. And so this made sense. This empowerment resonates. So I brought that to India. And by a series of accidents, and finally in 2014, I told the hospital, I want to start a diabetes education class, because I had this one patient that I mentioned on my diet doctor interview where he was maxed out on 5 tablets and had uncontrolled diabetes and refused to get on insulin. So I had these partial ideas in my head about what to do. And here this man was forcing me to now put new ideas together that were sort of marinating in the back of my head. And that's when lifestyle change, actually, he went low carb. He started cutting his chapatis, like Indian rotis, down, and his glucose levels started coming down without getting him on insulin. I was like, his pancreas cannot be all that dead or burnt out if he's responding to food changes. His sugars are actually coming down. And that's what started the idea of let's do this officially. So in 2014, I started doing diabetes education in the hospital that I was at. So this was now one of its kind, an endocrinologist running diabetes self-management education classes. And from there, it's been just a joyride. I never stopped. I never looked back. And one day I got invited to a diabetes reversal conference in India. And that's when I saw Jason Fung's video. So the people on that panel were from Ayurveda and from homeopathy. And I was the only allopathic doctor there, like Western trained doctor, traditional. And because I had built a reputation over the years of being okay to talk about deep prescription. And then Jason Fung is on the screen and I'm like, oh, he's talking the right stuff. So I buy all his books. And since then, now I know where I belong.
What do you think has changed in India to see these huge diabetes rates now that we're seeing, especially in a mostly vegan or a vegetarian population? Like how do we rectify what's happening right now?
India is a very large and very complex country, so you'll find a little bit of everything here. I have met carnivores, I've met vegans, I meet plenty of vegetarians. I'm a vegetarian myself. There is a lot of entrenchment with the prescription model. You'll see a lot of large diabetes multi-specialty centers where it's a one-stop shop where you'll get your eye tested, foot tested, Dopplers for vascular blockages, blood testing, pharmacy, everything is in one place. So even if you're sick from diabetes, the owner of that campus makes money. So there's really no financial reason for them to want reversal, because you'll just keep going through the system and it's accepted. It's not seen as a conflict of interest at all. And at the same time, you do see, thankfully now, diabetes reversal startups that are coming in. So sending out technology like a smart scale, a smart, CGMs, and having that connect back to the doctor's panel, chat support, that's beginning to start now. There are at least 3 to 4 startups like this. We're doing similar work. There are low carb communities and individual practitioners popping up. Fitness is picking up here. Keto catering services have started, because in India we still believe in cooking and eating freshly cooked food, and it's not as penetrated with junk food or prepackaged ready-made food yet. So keto lunch services, keto meal services have started as well. So things are moving. It's complex, but I see a lot of stuff changing. It's a very exciting time.
So help me understand. I'd imagine if you're reversing diabetes, and it sounds like it's unfortunate. I have no particular issue with homeopathy, holistic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. I think the patients who turn to these modalities often are very vulnerable.
Yes.
So sometimes they can be taken advantage of, and that's true with modern medicine as well. But I think, it sounds like you found allies from this community, right?
Yeah.
Now, help me understand, did your conventional colleagues view you as an ally? right? Did the other endocrinologists, the cardiologist, did the traditional sort of academic Indian medical system view you as an ally?
That's been a little harder to do. I would say the more of the embrace has come from the grassroots, from the patients, from the people who want it. Colleagues, there are like, maybe I can think of on my fingertips, there are some friends who are colleagues who have become friends now who literally get it. So there's a chest physician friend, there's an orthopedician, there's a nephrologist, there are a handful of cardiologists who are beginning to appreciate this and support this kind of work. Endocrinology has been a little slow. I don't know. People are talking about it. People are, there are startups where there are endocrinologists on the panel, so I wouldn't say it's all bad. But have we come together as a community? Do we have lifestyle change conferences where, I think I was one of the earliest ones making a big noise about this from 2014 onwards. I put myself on the map in Mumbai and in India. And I was regarded as unconventional for a long time, that she's unconventional. And, it took time, but when you sit around and you do the same thing for 9 years nonstop without getting affected, you realize, you know what, now it's not so unconventional. It's becoming conventional now. And now those same people are heading those kinds of startups. So it's a good thing, it took time. It's still a relatively minority or even almost lonely sometimes. But I hope that with podcasts like this and hopefully with more media catching on, we can switch that movement.
Yeah, I was surprised just having friends in the Indian community watching the attacks online. I mean, it was nasty from other doctors, from endocrinologists. That's why I was kind of joking with you a little bit, because it was like death threat type stuff. It wasn't like just, hey, we don't agree with you. I mean, it was like nasty attacks, and
Wow.
and it's amazing how they weathered that storm. And it seems like it's turning the tide of public opinion, because when you see your patients come off insulin, that changes everything.
It does. You're bringing back a bad memory. I kind of had suppressed it, but I'll share now what had happened. I was a speaker talking about lifestyle change. And again, like I said, the local medical associations call you for Dr. CME lectures. So I'm standing on stage and I'm saying I deprescribed. I went from 4 tablets for diabetes to 3 and 2 and 1 for this patient, or I got them off insulin. And my teammates, like my staff, were sitting in the second row. And the doctors in the front row were whispering to each other, "She's so reckless." I wouldn't have known that they said that, except that my staff were sitting right behind and they overheard this whisper. So I'm glad that I'm not being regarded as reckless anymore. And so when you mention the attacks, I think that's real. I choose to be a bit compassionate there. This is probably cognitive dissonance, and I know that I've argued with patients that insulin is the right thing for you. This is burnt out diabetes, because we're good. Doctors are good students. We love our textbooks, and we got to where we are in life because of our textbooks, and so then it's up to us to say, okay, are we going to also learn from our patients? And that's not always easy, I think. I was lucky. I got introduced to good colleagues, this diabetes educator, her name's Judy. She was an early influence in my practice, and it stayed with me, the idea of education. So I think I was lucky. Maybe not all colleagues of ours have been lucky enough to be influenced by an inspirational patient experience. Maybe, in Tro's case, it's like personal experience where you yourself feel like the healthcare system failed you. I hope that we don't have to go through such negative experiences, and I hope that we can have more of these wake-up calls where more doctors can turn around. But the pushback is we're anti-establishment, so the establishment will push, but I think when you're doing the right thing, so I tend to forget. I'm trying to have a short-term memory for the painful experiences. But yes, I've had, sometimes I get enthusiastic. I'm like, okay, you promised me you're going to cut your carbs. It's doctor-patient relationship. you promised me you're going to cut your carbs. I'm going to reduce your insulin because I don't want you getting into a low blood sugar reaction. And guess what? They reduce the insulin, but they don't reduce the carbs. And then they have 10 advisors at home, including doctors who are like now wagging their fingers saying, you went to that doctor? She doesn't know what she's doing. She's putting you in danger. Look at your sugar. It's so high. You have to be on insulin and just eat your sugars and eat your carbs and take the insulin. So, so that push does come. And I've spent many nights upset about these things. And I've sort of gotten over it. Of course, now I have better process. If you think of yourself as almost like an entrepreneur, starting something new, you have to be okay with failure and mistakes, never at the expense of patient health, but in terms of learning how to communicate what it is that you're doing and making sure that you work with patients who have clear understanding of what they're getting into. So those are some lessons I've learned in doing this in a very lonely landscape in the first 5-8 years. It was very lonely. So you learn to safeguard yourself and your patients from misunderstanding and risk.
Yeah, it takes extreme ownership to do what we do, right?
Yes.
It takes extreme ownership. And, you mentioned sort of continuous care model, remote monitoring, texting, immediate feedback, immediate access, right?
Yeah.
And this is taking ownership. This is patient empowerment, right? Like, I am your ally and I will do everything I can to help you reach your goal, right? And that is true patient empowerment and taking ownership. And I think that that's the missing piece needed in our healthcare system, and why we will always be renegades and we will always be lonely, because most people in our field don't have that. They don't have extreme ownership. They don't have a fire in their gut to do anything they can to help somebody. It's very few people. I mean, Brian talks about him moving from his practice, and he had 10 colleagues or so, and they all thought he was crazy, right? Because he moved away from that traditional model. He was like, this is enough's enough, right?
Yes.
I just want to throw some in. This is funny. Just the other night, I was out to dinner with my wife at like 5:30, believe it or not. As a doctor going out to dinner at 5:30, we're hanging out. And one of the head guys at the HMO I used to work with texted me. He's like, hey, are you going to Boca Raton to this low carb conference? I was like, what? Like, I tried to tell you about this. Like, you thought I was nuts like 5 years ago. And so it's amazing when you start looking, people come around, they're like, look, you're having numbers, you're having results. Like, if it's not working, people don't come to you. If you're crazy, people say they figure it out. So it's amazing how people realize that. And I kind of joked with him. I say, hey man, I'm out to dinner with my wife. And he goes, wow. He goes, I'm going to be at work for another 3 hours. Right.
Well,
Is it like talk about lifestyle?
Exactly. I mean, and you got to walk the talk. And I think if you know it in your bones, then you don't feel so lonely. And like you said, time ends up proving what's right, and truth eventually emerges out, And I used to go for those invited talks with pharma a while ago. I stopped doing that. I don't prescribe as much anymore, so I'm not very popular amongst the pharma community. But whenever I did it, I would always say that even if I prescribe this drug, I prescribe it because I believe in it, and I'm not anti-medicine. The idea is to give you prescriptions to help you along and not keep you in dangerous levels of high glucose. So we're not allergic to prescriptions. So the ones that I believe in, I'm willing to come and talk about. But you have to allow me to say that if you make your patients do lifestyle changes, if this is a medical audience, you have to let me say to the audience that if you help your patients make lifestyle changes, you can deprescribe. If you're not going to let me say that, then I can't be a speaker. And they always allowed it. They allowed it. And guess what? When they had friends and family who ended up with health needs, they knew who they wanted to work with. If they were trying to avoid medication for their own friends and family, they might work for pharma, but they might not want to pop the pills. So I think truth eventually emerges. And then you don't feel so lonely.
And I think also having a reasonable approach, like what you're saying. Yes, there are people that need insulin. They need insulin, right? Our job is to minimize the amount of insulin they need if they need it, and to try to say, okay, what can we do? And when we talk about Western medicine and this mind-body connection and everything, and Absolutely. I'm actually going to give a talk in San Diego about this, and it's stunning to me the impact our mindset has. And I see to my patients, I go, oh, the mindset. I see where you're coming from and why you're stressed and why you're worried. You want to go back to your old ways, and it's just amazing how much just sleep deprivation. We all know it going through training. Sleep deprivation. You're hungry the next day. We have tons of studies showing why. It's
Exactly.
not a mystery. It's not a guess. It's not my opinion. It's what the data shows. And if you're stressed, guess what? You're going to crave more carbohydrates. That's what the data shows. And we have physiologic reasons for that. So it's
Mhm.
amazing how much we've neglected that. How often does the American Heart Association talk about Roseto, Pennsylvania, where they had the lowest heart disease rate? And they were all
Mhm.
Italians eating all kinds of Italian food, and they were overweight, and their cholesterol was high, and their heart rate was half of the rest of the population. Why? They had community, they loved each other and helped each other,
Community.
and they weren't stressed all day.
Community. Right. Yeah, agreed. It was community. And I agree that the data has been there within allopathic medicine also, but it's been inconvenient and there might be other interests that don't want that stuff to come out. And I read the ADA guidelines, most of us look at those colorful charts and we're just like busy and we're like, okay, what's the new algorithm I need to follow? And it's colorful and it's got arrows and it points all one way. It's like more medicine, more medicine, more medicine. But I look through it, and if you type Control F, low carb, it doesn't come. But when you put low dash carb or very dash low dash carb, you find it. And it's there. It's in a very convoluted sentence. I'll tell you what the sentence says. It says, for those in whom reducing the number of glucose lowering medications is a priority, reducing carbohydrates is a viable option. Can you say that in English? What are you saying? They're saying it's
Well, they're
in there.
saying, yeah, and if you're allergic to peanuts, lowering the amount of peanuts you use will make you lean less prednisone.
Right, exactly. They're saying it, but it's so difficult to find and so difficult to understand, but it's there. And I take that and I highlight it in yellow and I magnify it and I make a post out of it. I'm like, they are agreeing that low carb helps you reduce medication. And you're right. I mean, sleep, we know, stress management. So I ended up wanting to take ownership of all of that. And that's why in 2016, I left the hospital environment, because another thing which happened to me in the US and in India was inpatient rounds, just for an endocrinologist, means whoever's like bedbound for other things, when they have high blood sugars, the majority of our billing is to go and tweak inpatient insulin doses. Sugars are a little high, pump in a little bit more insulin. That was the essence of inpatient rounds. Lots of money to be made, very little doctor-patient conversation to be had, because these patients are, in pain from a fracture, or they've been wheeled off to surgery and they're not even in the room, or they're sleeping, or they're in the ICU, and there's no lifestyle change discussion. It's like 2 minutes. And I would not
Is
feel, yeah.
It's mind numbing. It's mind numbing what happens at the hospital. My diabetic patient gets admitted, they're on oral meds, they leave on insulin. And what happens is they're giving them D5W, they're giving them sugar water in their veins, and their sugars go higher, and they go, oh my gosh, they need more insulin. Let's give them more insulin, more insulin. We got to get the sugars down. Well, can you turn
Yeah,
the sugar off in their vein and see what happens to their sugars? Like, it
right.
just doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
it doesn't make sense. And the diabetic tray is all carbs. It's all carbs.
But it's low fat.
There's what?
But it's low
But it's
fat.
low fat.
It's low fat. It's low calorie. It's 1,200 calorie. It's low fat. And so it works. And it's just carbs, carbs, carbs. And so I just got so dejected with inpatient rounds. And I finally decided this is not making sense. I need to take full ownership of the end-to-end experience here. So 2016 is when I left hospital medicine. And if I think about starting med school in 1995, so from 95 to 2016, every day I would get up and go to a hospital. It's 20 years of my life, from the age of 18 when we started med school till the age of whatever that was, 37 or 38, is every day get up and go to a hospital. And then finally in 2016, I was like, no, I'm not going to go to a hospital. I'm going to go where I can help patients heal and stay out of hospital. And one job interview in the hospital, when I had come in, they were like, how many admissions will you give us per month? Because hospital admissions are where the hospitals make money. And I was naive and stupid and blunt, and thank God for that, because I said, if I do my job right, I will give you 0 admissions per month. And the interview obviously ended there. I did not get accepted at that hospital. But, so I decided to take ownership of all of this: nutrition, sleep, stress management, exercise. And then in 2018, the fasting came. And then in 2020, we decided we'll do program only, where again, you sort of copy what everybody does, is you come to the doctor on an SOS emergency basis when there is a problem. You're not going there proactively to prevent problems. So I had to flip that and say, no, we will only work with you on a 3-month basis minimum, because I need to work with you on these habits. I need to be available to you. You need to be accountable to me. And we need to actually have a doctor-patient relationship. And especially in India, there's no insurance company in the outpatient setting. So you can decide that today you want to go to that doctor, you don't like them, so tomorrow you want to go to that doctor. You can decide to never show up again at that doctor's office. The doctor never knows if you're coming back or not. So it was very risky then. I realized that this is not the way I want to be, where I write a prescription, I take responsibility for changing your meds, and now I'm exposed to whatever happens to you, but I don't know if you're ever coming back. So I canceled that. I was like, no, program only. So that happened in 2020.
Yeah, we saw the same thing, like you can't, it's not worth me doing a one-time consultation. I cannot tell you how many people say, I want to do a consultation. I don't do consultations. There is no way my office will do a consultation. You can watch videos about me. You can watch my lectures. You can download the app. You can get a whole bunch of resources we made for you. You can come to meetings. You can hear us talk. You can engage with us in any way you want. But I'm not going to do a one-time consultation, because it does not serve a patient. It doesn't serve me. Like I'm a big believer in, because you can have a patient who goes from an A1C of 12 to 6 or 5, right? And then they'll have a period of stress, or they'll have, a moment of weakness, and things can change on a dime. So there is no purpose in reversing diabetes only to leave somebody vulnerable and back in a system that really doesn't care about them. So I'm with you. I don't think we don't do anybody a service by doing a one-time consult. There's nothing you're going to gain from a one-time visit.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue the point is, I do one-time consults for some people in a big healthcare system where they won't get an HMO, they won't get an insulin level, they won't get a coronary calcium. I can do a one-time or two-time consult, usually a two-time consult, right? We'll follow up on the labs, we'll do labs, and at least say, hey, here's where you're at. Here's the and here you can listen to Low Carb MD, you can listen to Tro, you can get his app, whatever you want to do. But sometimes just having that one time where they know, because until you have to know the numbers, right? You have to know where you're at, and a vast majority of people, once they see that, say, okay, I want to stay with you and I want to get this under control. But I'll tell you, in that same system, Tro, this is something, and I'm absolutely dumbfounded by this. And you talked about, I learned from it about it from you, Tro, I think, is the ACE questionnaire, right? The adverse childhood events. And I reached out to the main author. I just sent him an email, and he was nice enough to call me. We talked for an hour on the phone, right? It is an absolutely stunning. He was the head of an obesity treatment center, and he would see people start to lose weight. Then you're right, stress would hit, something would happen, boom, they gain all the way back plus some. You talk about childhood abuse. So when he started asking these questions that we don't like to talk about, out of 10 questions, if you score 6 out of 10 correct, affirmative, that your dad was a drunk, your mom left you, you said you're an idiot when you're growing up, why can't you be like your brother? They had a 4,600% increased risk of suicide, morbid obesity, diabetes, drug abuse, all these things. So they looked at the numbers and they did a huge study and said, hey, you know what? If we address these issues with counseling, with lifestyle modification, with forgiveness, or whatever it might be, we can decrease our visits by 35%, right? 11% decrease in ER visits based on their data. You could save your system. It was something in the neighborhood of $35 million a year. And they never implemented it. Why? The doctor said, we don't have time to deal with this. We don't want to deal with those problems. Can you imagine, like, you can help your patient, and if you score 6 out of 10 on this, your life expectancy is 20 years shorter than the general population. Absolutely astounding. If we're here to save lives like that, we have to intervene on these things. Tro, you're the expert on this.
No, I'm gonna just say you have to get that guy. We got to talk to him. So maybe all of us will come.
He's a fantastic guy. I'm going to drag him on. Yeah.
Yeah, drag him on. I mean, but it's a point that Dr. Roshani sort of you brought up, which is, you have to own that patient. It cannot be just a one time thing. Before we, I wonder if you guys are okay. I want to segue because you have such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to, and you tell me, Brian, if I'm missing something or something we should bring up before we move on. There's the Indian, sub-Asian, Asian population is so unique, and there's so many unique characteristics. I mean, certainly childhood adversity may apply to them as well, as much as it does in America, but there's metabolic factors, differences in weight where we see disease, differences in response, different culinary habits. And, I'm interested to explore some of that and understand the unique needs of people in India, in, Asia, sub-Asia, and how you approach that versus, back here in the States where everybody has mental health disease, adverse childhood, issues, as Brian mentioned. And, I think there are some important differences, and I don't know if you can just explore around that. Brian, I didn't mean to cut the conversation short. Did I cut the conversation short, or?
No, I love it. No, these all go together because it all does tie together. It really does.
So hit us with some facts. Like I know, for example, even things like the weight at which people get disease is much different in Asia, sub-Asia. I can tell you, I don't know if this is fact yet or proven yet, but the use of, I have seen a study in India, I have to dig it up, where they swapped out soybean oil for olive oil and it improved diabetes markers. So just these cultural things where the cooking habits, the maybe vegetarianism and how it impacts, or veganism and how it impacts sort of what you do, the differences, the different metabolic differences, how do you, having trained in the States, what are some of the things you've learned practicing in India that you wish a conventional US doctor like me or Brian knew?
Yeah, a lot of small pointers in lots of realms. So you're right, it's the Indian phenotype. And also I think so in Asia, within that, India and China particularly take the lead in terms of diabetes numbers. And we are not number one in obesity rates, but we are number one, if you put India and China together, we're number one for cardiometabolic disease, whether that's cardiac or diabetes. So that says a lot, is how did we get number one there when we didn't have number one on obesity? Is we have the thin fat phenotype, or the TOFI as we call it, is thin on the outside, fat on the inside, that the little bit of stomach fat or the visceral fat around the waistline is extremely toxic to the Indian body type. And we have a lot of muscle loss. We have a lot of sarcopenia. I think a lot of that is we are vastly protein deficient. And I started checking people's protein intake by doing diet recalls, like 7-day diet review. Literally everything they eat has to come to us in writing. And there are issues with food logs generally from a statistics point of view, but it's the best we have. And when we count it out and we assess people's protein, we were finding their protein intake to be 0.3 to 0.4 grams per kilo, which is, well, I mean, if you multiply by 2.2, it'll tell you in pounds. But if the worldwide malnutrition cutoff is 0.8 grams per kilogram, people were at about half of that. And one of the reasons that has happened is India has spread this really terrible rumor about uric acid and kidney disease, where they were listening across the Atlantic Ocean and they heard somebody say, You need to reduce your protein intake if you want to protect your kidneys. And they forgot to check the numbers or the math. They just heard the words is reduce protein intake to protect kidneys. So microalbuminuria, where the protein is now spilling in the urine because of diabetes or hypertension. And people will say, stop taking protein in your mouth because you need to protect your kidneys by reducing your protein. But nobody's doing the nutritional assessment. Is this person really taking more than 0.8? Most of the times they're at 0.4, and you need to drag them up to 0.8. And so when you don't give them enough protein for decades, they have lost so much muscle, so much muscle. So we have a lot of sarcopenia. We have a lot of insulin resistance with this tiny body frames. So people with normal BMIs, and yes, the Asian cutoff for BMI can be 23, but within that BMI of 23, the body fat percentage is much higher and the body muscle percentage is much lower when we do it. We don't do the DEXAs on everybody because everything is out of pocket, but you can just see it. You see visibly muscle loss, and you can see this the fat around the waistline. So that is a phenotype difference, and there's probably genetic reasons for that. And I've spoken to some experts about this, about why is it? And we think that in the tropical climate that India has, there was really no need to make storage capacity in the subcutaneous compartment. So you could always walk around and eat food. It was tropical, it was abundant, and there was no winter. There was no cold winter where fruits and everything just disappeared. So there was always something to eat. And now with the nutrition abundance that we have in the processed food and just westernization of the diets, we're now overnourished on carbs, but malnourished on protein. So good homes, wealthy homes or low income homes, across the board, you'll see protein deficiency. So that's just one. And then you add the cultural vegetarianism to it. I think I should say this, like I told Brett in the Diet Doctor interview about how when you go to a restaurant in India, there will be the menu, and the menu starts with appetizers, mains, entrees. And within each of those sections, it says vegetarian, and then it says non-vegetarian. That's the way the menu is always aligned. So whenever you are eating meat or fish or poultry, that's automatically labeled under the category of non-veg. Even eggs comes under non-vegetarian. And same goes for packaged food or medications or supplements that you buy. India is so conscious about not taking eggs or animal products like gelatin or meat products or fish, for example, fish oil capsules, that it'll have a green dot because not everybody reads English. So it'll have a green dot if it has none of these animal products, and it'll have a red dot if it has eggs, gelatin, or any beef, poultry, chicken, fish products in there. Dairy is going to come under a green dot, but everything that's in a package has the green and the red dot. That's how important it is for people.
So when we're dealing with sarcopenia, lack of muscle mass, and we see that, someone like Sean Baker with tons of muscle mass, his visceral fat's going to be lower because they're antagonistic to each other. So the problem becomes, and the challenge for us is, okay, if someone's vegetarian, how do we increase their protein intake? I mean, for us, we're thinking, okay, eggs, pea protein. What else can we do to really increase muscle mass? Because that's if you look at longevity, one of the biggest indicators is muscle mass. So if you're sarcopenic, if you're vegan and you're super skinny and you have no muscle mass, you're going to be in trouble down the road with when we look at osteoporosis. These are just facts. It's just what we see. So it's a hard thing. How do we balance that? How do we say, okay, given the situation, ethically or from an ethnic or ethical standpoint, or a religious standpoint, how do we say, okay, let's make you as healthy as we can and still respect your cultural, your desires nutritionally?
Yeah, we have to. And that's the only way to make the dialogue go ahead because it's so entrenched. It's not going anywhere. And there's a very strong cultural, even the people who do eat meat often will say on Monday and Thursday, I don't touch meat because of religious reasons. So even the ones who are committed to eating animal products oftentimes will have 1 or 2 vegetarian days in the week. So this is a massive problem. I think my daily work has become to be a protein warrior. You know, if we can do protein and muscle, most of our problems get sorted. So for the vegetarians, and again, I spoke with Brett about this, is we're not so fond of tofu. Indians are not so fond of tofu. They like paneer, which is Indian fresh cheese from milk, which you can make at home by just splitting the milk with some lemon. And it's soft and fresh. And that has a more interesting texture for the Indian palate. It takes up flavor more well than tofu does, if you ask an Indian person. But tofu is good. We have to work with people's battles against soy products and processed soy products. But at the end of the day, you're not getting enough amino acids. You're not getting enough protein. I'm like, we have to pick our battles. I respect your religious choice, but being protein malnourished and metabolically sick is not what God wanted for you. So and you know, in India, it's easy to talk about God because one of the reasons people do this is for their spiritual and religious beliefs. And so they do get it. They do get it. I make it a point when I screen for who is trying to work with us, or if we're trying to work with somebody, to make sure that they understand that getting protein to target is going to be one of our major goals. And I end up using a protein supplement, because the minute you try to get protein to target with vegetarian things like beans and lentils and legumes, there's so much fiber and natural complex carbohydrate in there, and it fills you up. And so it's very hard to get beyond, I would say, 20 grams of protein in a meal if you decide to have like a big bowl full of beans or legumes. And we haven't even touched the Indian habit of wanting the meal to be complete with either roti or rice. So if you're from the north, it's roti or paratha or chapati. It's from the south and from west, like from Bengal on the east side, huge cultural reliance on rice. And they don't feel the meal is complete without that. So I have to then work on that and say, did you know? And so this is one thing we do with our app, is we make people count their nutrition, their macros. It comes back to them. This is all the Indian food where we've calculated and display to them their carbs and proteins so that they get to decide for themselves. And we say, look, low carb is 80 to 100 grams per day. So it's pretty impossible to get Indians on keto for life because they're vegetarian. They're not going to reach their protein targets as vegetarians and stay keto forever. They'll be eating paneer and cheese all day long. And it won't sustain. So we say, look, low carb is 80 to 100, and your protein target is, I battle with them to get them to 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kg per day. If I can get them there, and then I add on the other stuff, which is the sleep, the stress management, the hypertrophy-based, progressive overload workouts, and the intermittent fasting. Thank God for intermittent fasting, because that has been the one way to do that switch where you're adding muscle and trying to burn fat. But we have to make sure we're getting enough protein and hypertrophy workouts, because otherwise the concern is that fasting can cause muscle loss in the malnourished sedentary person. So it's complex, and we have to really orchestrate these moving parts. And a lot of it is happening at the mind level, mindset, is, can we get these people to accept protein? And Indian gut health is also not good. So we have a lot of gut health issues. So the minute they increase their protein, there's a lot of gastric complaints, digestive complaints. I think they get some SIBO. I think they get maybe even some FODMAP intolerance. And so we have to, and then what are you supposed to take away from the FODMAP group is beans, legumes, and pulses. So we have to really work with them to improve their gut health, so that they can actually start accepting the protein. And I also think they probably have, whether people agree on the word leaky gut or not, but they do get a lot of gastric GI distress when we increase protein too fast, too soon. I think they probably have a unhealthy, like almost like kwashiorkor, kind of a malnourished gut wall, which it's so unhealthy that the absorptive capacity is not there because your gut lining is damaged from malnutrition. They might be overweight, but over fat, but malnourished, protein malnourished.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I go to Guatemala, I see a fair amount of people that are normal weight with diabetes. And some of the docs down there say if you give them milk, their sugars get better. I say, well, there's sugar in milk. He said, I don't know, but it gets better. And I don't know if there's some nutritional, if it's casein, if it's some deficiency, that it's just very interesting to see that.
I wonder if
I
it's
don't know if in
leucine.
India, yeah.
Well, we have some diabetes reversal groups that are very popular in India that are vegan. So the human body is amazing. You know, in Guatemala, they're saying milk is helping get sugars down. We know we use milk as one of the hypoglycemia treatments. It's part of the 15-15-15 rule is drink milk to bring your sugars up. So I don't know how that uncontrolled, maybe instead of drinking soda pop, they're drinking milk. And so that's better. So the glucose gets better because they're taking away sugar sweetened beverages. But
Yeah,
you'll
and
see
it may help. It may help with the gut too, because it was really. I was just reading a study. I was looking at stress and sleep and all this stuff we're talking about. They were talking about in college students, if they drank apple cider vinegar, 1 tablespoon twice a day, it decreased their depressive rates by 34% in this study. And then they looked at the increase of uptake of glucose into the muscles with exercise. Apple cider vinegar seems to help with that and lowers the sugar burden. So people have anecdotally said that when they have a glass of apple cider vinegar, they don't have as much of a glycemic response as they do if they don't. And in a lot of the Asian countries, they would cook their rice with vinegar and they would maybe get less of a glycemic response, and they don't do that anymore. So it is kind of interesting. Sometimes you just have these combinations that seem to help people. And it looks like it's because as we get older, we lose some, and in diabetes, you lose some of the gut microbiome that's making acetic acid basically. So it's replenishing that and helping it. So it is pretty intriguing how, little different combinations can help too. Or if they're adding protein to their carbohydrates they're eating, that maybe that helps or fats to decrease the glucose excursions and insulin response.
Yeah, there's probably some ancient wisdom buried there. I mean, so vinegar helping glycemic response, I mean, that's probably, there might be some anecdotal stuff there. India doesn't use vinegar in cooking as much. We would use more lemon. If we wanted to do something for tartness, we do lemon and tomato more than vinegar. So I don't know if there's a history of vinegar there, but like you may hear in India, they'll say, oh, dal and rice is a combination that you're supposed to do together. Like there's this comfort food when someone's not well, you give them something called khichdi, which is basically cooked dal or lentil with rice. And the nutritional decoding of that is that the amino acids that were missing in the dal are getting completed by the rice because neither of them is a complete protein. They have some amino acids missing in both. But the combination, ancient wisdom must have figured this out, that when you give the two together, you're giving the complete protein profile.
How about as far as cooking oils now? It used to be when they were making curry, they would use butter and ghee, and now it seems like they switch over to vegetable oil more, from what I'm understanding, and margarine. Is that correct?
Soybean oil, right? Is probably the biggest.
Soybean oil. Yeah.
No, I don't see a lot of soybean oil in India, Tro. But you're right about the switch. So ancient, grandmothers and all used to do the coconut oil and the ghee. And then the modern, hyper intelligent Western following population decided to copy and said, oh, we should be doing vegetable oils because that's what the West was doing. And that's what we copied in the 80s. And so now 20, 30 years later, big advertising money for rice bran oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil as the healthy oils. Heart healthy, like right outside the hospital on a bus stop, you'll see this giant billboard for sunflower oil as heart healthy. So the messaging is very aggressive, very strong. Even in the 80s, I grew up seeing hydrogenated oil as a big thing. It was like stable, and in the Indian weather, it didn't go bad. It was good at room temperature. Everybody didn't own a fridge. So in a house, something that won't go rancid was good. It was cheap and it was good. And it tastes better. So it was being used a lot. So we are still fighting the refined oil problem. Groundnut oil, which is peanut oil, is taken well in the western parts of the country. Ghee is well accepted in the north, and coconut oil is well accepted in the south. And cold pressed, even mustard oil is well accepted in the east. So there are some regional differences to what was growing and what they were doing cold pressed. If you ask them what their grandmother used, then you'll find these differences. And I've looked up the MUFA and the PUFA profiles of these regional oils. And nothing is better. The best ones, like the gold standards, are olive oil and ghee. And then everything else is combinations of good, bad, ugly. But it starts to get worse when you go towards the sunflower, safflower, and rice bran. Highly processed, highly refined.
I think
sometimes it seems like the smarter we get, the worse we do. As a matter of fact, one of my patients, his whole family has diabetes, and his dad owns a bunch of Mexican restaurants. So he said they used to always use lard for their beans. That's how the tradition. That's how it always was. And then they said, "Oh, that's bad. Let's switch over to vegetable oil." So he would have signs everywhere. We don't use lard. We use vegetable oil. They all got diabetes and obesity after that. These are all family got fat after that. So he goes, "Do you think that could have something to do with it?" I was like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, it just tradition. Sometimes that's why they do it that way. They know the combination that worked, and then we go, oh, we're smarter now. We're going to change it up."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We all went through that. So people who do naturally even cook meat, they went through this phase of trim the fat, don't keep the fat, the natural fat that's on the animal in the skin and, the marbling and all that, where it was considered bad if you wanted to eat it, but it was so tasty. If they ate it, they felt guilty because they're like, it tastes so good and I want to keep some of it, and they're almost apologizing for it. There's even like bone broth is a cultural thing in some cultures to use, like to make a bone soup. It's called paya soup, which is the foot. You know how like there are now the what is it, nose to tail eating kind of thing. So the foot is boiled and it's called paya soup. So paya means foot. So foot soup is a common thing in some cultures. So there are some ancient wisdom things that you have to go dig out and bring them back and make them popular.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like sometimes, and we know that like even in modern medicine, you ask grandma what to do for constipation, and it was milk and magnesia, and what do we do now? We give magnesium, as a supplement for this. A lot of I think there's something to be said about the strategies that have stood the test of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think sometimes we get too educated. Like you said, the more we know, the dumber we get. And it's going to be a balance. Is we like to say we practice evidence-based medicine. And then at the same time, who's going to publish or fund the evidence behind common sense lifestyle, like just being as natural as you can with your choices of food, like minimally processed food. Why do we need evidence to support minimally processed or unprocessed food? Especially when
the amazing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, the amazing thing is I was thinking back to Dr. Unwin when you were talking one of his patients, they couldn't get her sugars under control. Then she started eating what her mom and grandma ate, and they were healthy. So she said they were eating eggs and meat and doing what they did. And she does that, and her diabetes gets reversed. She loses weight, everything gets better. And so he was stunned by that, thinking, how could you be eating terrible stuff and getting better? And then when he started implementing it, so it was the old wisdom that came back again. And so many times we just have to clue in and go, oh, I'm telling you, there's certain things that my Hispanic patients will be eating, and they go, I eat this. Look, Nepali, it's a cactus. And they have that with eggs, and their sugars come down. I was like, okay, I see it on the CGM. I see what's happening. Every time you eat that, your sugars are getting better. Okay, let's do that. Yeah. I'll learn from you.
Exactly. And, somebody said this on the Low Carb Denver 2023 stage, where they said, human beings are the only species on Earth that has to ask each other what to eat.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't see, we don't see the lion stopping everything and, asking its fellow lion, should I eat should I eat the liver or should I leave it alone? Is there too much cholesterol in the liver? I don't think they ask those questions. Yeah, I got one last question that maybe we can tackle before we sort of wrap up. As an endocrinologist, I'm sure you see a lot of type 1 patients. So how do you manage type 1 patients? In our clinic, we're very aggressive on monitoring. Some of their new pumps can have even more sort of strict targets. And low carb is certainly taboo in type 1, but I think it's gaining favor. So how have you managed that as an endocrinologist in India?
Oh yeah. So I take carb counting very seriously, and we do basal bolus for people who are on multiple daily injections. One problem in India is a pump is out of pocket in India, so it costs as much as buying a small car. So it's very prohibitive for a family to decide to invest in a pump. The families that can afford it, we do get them on a pump. We don't have too many vendors in the market. We have mainly Medtronic. So there aren't too many competitors. So Medtronic is the main one. Interestingly, we got the 670G before it came out in the US because patients buying it out of pocket can just buy it. It's not, you're not waiting for red tape or things. People are able to go buy it and bring it and they start using it. So I had to self-teach myself the latest pump, the latest Medtronic pump. But we do carb counting, we do low carb, and I don't force it on people, but I just show them that, look, you've been unstable when you were on premixed insulin. You were unstable when you were on fixed dose insulin, where the doctor tells you to take, let's say, 10, 10, 10 units at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then your food keeps changing because you're human and you have a life to live. And then your sugars are sometimes high, sometimes low, no patterns are visible. And then you get labeled as brittle. So I tell people there's no such thing as brittle diabetes. Brittle type 1, it's not a thing. Brittle type 1 means your doctor has not figured out your insulin carbohydrate ratio yet, and you're probably on a high carb intake and fluctuating carbohydrate intake, and then the fixed dose insulin is not working. So we insist on doing insulin carb ratios, and then they get to do the math because then they start to over time see. So what I like to do is let the patient wisdom kick in. Is I'm not going to stop their carbs or reduce them. I'm going to show them that the more carbs you take, the more insulin you're going to need. And you're going to see very steep upslopes and you're going to see very steep downslopes. So if you want to have a more even keel, that's when low carb comes into the picture. And then when they start to try it out, it starts to rub off. And again, here, peer-to-peer support makes a huge difference. So I run a type 1 diabetes community for our patients where they support each other. We have some very good low carb advocates there who went the whole journey of letting go of carbs and reducing carbs to show how stable they were. And that becomes powerful when you learn from somebody else who has it, not just a doctor preaching to you who's never lived with it. So that peer-to-peer testimonial and social proof of low carb, that's what keeps them going. They get stable sugars. So their CGMs look like that, like dream CGMs is like that. And then Diet Doctor has done some fantastic interviews of type 1 doctors who have type 1 who've done 5-day fasts and who are low carbers. So we share that, and now the Indian low carb community for type 1 is growing. So it's really exciting time.
Cannot tell you. I think that's a big area that needs more attention in the metabolic health space. Definitely a deeply vulnerable population. A lot of times, endocrinologists are very authoritarian, and many people have been told what to do at a very young age. So there may be some learned helplessness even around that, like, questioning what they've been told and maybe trying something else. So it's good to know that there's, communities out there helping these people.
Oh, yes, for sure. And we do measure their diabetes distress scores for both type 1 and type 2, the score created by Polonsky and Fisher. And it is such a beautiful scale, and it shows people, it separates out depression and it separates out diabetes related distress. And there's a separate one for type 1 and a separate one for type 2. And it's so powerful to see those numbers change, that once they get a doctor who understands and helps them and be the masters of their own health and their metabolic improvements, and having peer-to-peer understanding and getting the family to understand, the distress score comes down. And I put on my YouTube channel an interview of one of the young women who was willing to share her journey of type 1. And we did a 3-part interview where she shared how, she went through a time where she felt like a burden on her family because it's out of pocket. There's no insurance helping you. So little children in India having type 1, everybody doesn't have the wealth or the financial resources to spend on this disease. It can be prohibitive if you look at the costs of the insulin and the technology and the monitoring, continuous testing, and it's just kind of relentless. So the burnout is real for both the young person living with it and for the caregivers. So the need for a community and understanding healthcare professionals is huge.
Amen.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's going to be a ton of people who are going to listen to this interview, and they're going to want to know how to contact you. We are rated in India as one of the for iTunes medicine. Believe it or not, I think we're in like the top 20 in India for iTunes medicine. So
Wow.
we will we'll certainly get people who want to know how they can find you, whether it's social media, whether it's your app, whether it's your clinic. How do they find you?
So on the web, we are at Reisaan Health. That's REISAAN health.com. And on Instagram, the same handle, Reisaan Health. And my personal handle is Roshani Sanghani, which is my first name and last name on Instagram. And the app is user only. It's invite only for people we're working with. It's not open on the Play Store well, as of now. Maybe when we roll out, we are planning to roll out 2.0, and let's see if we can make it more accessible. But right now it's for our existing, people we're working with.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us and late. Go to sleep now. You paid your dues with us.
Yeah, I decided not to wear my blue blocking glasses because I would look like Bono and it would look awkward. But yes, I was excited, and I'm breaking some of my rules today. I decided to have some black coffee right now to make sure I'm awake and alert for this.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, you can call Troy later if you can't sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think one night every now and then is okay. It's totally out of character, but it was worth it. This was so much fun, and I look forward to catching you guys at any in-person conferences, and would love to learn from each other and keep this movement going.
Yeah, rumor has it there's some low carb India conferences coming together and everything. So yeah, anything we can do to contribute, we'd love to, or get the word out. And and thank you for your courage and standing up and doing the right thing. And it's not easy when you're the only one saying, I see it different than everyone else. But really what ultimately matters is your patient outcomes, and you see how your patients are doing. It doesn't matter what the top endocrinologist in the country thinks if they're wrong.
Yeah. And luckily, I shouldn't sound ungrateful. I'm thankful. Things are moving, things are changing, and I'm not alone anymore. I know that. And I think India deserves this. The Indian population around the world deserves to have caregivers who understand where they're coming from. And it is growing. So I think, all of you all have helped increase worldwide awareness, and we're in a tribe now. So I pray that whoever needs to hear this and find the doctor or find the provider, I'm sure they'll find it. And thankfully, the lifestyle movement for metabolic and cardiometabolic health is here. It's here. It's not going to go away. And maybe some early movers and sort of anti-establishment people picked up the battle wounds, but it was worth it to do it when we did it, so we can do this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.